Welcome to Ring of Fire. I'm Farron Cousins, sitting in for Mike Papantonio this week. Coming up on today's show, we'll tell you why the GOP is already in trouble when it comes to choosing a presidential candidate for 2016. We'll find out why Democrats have decided to join up with Wall Street bankers to launch a full-on assault on your pension funds. And we'll find out why acts of terrorism on U.S. soil by U.S. citizens continue to be largely ignored. We have all that and more coming up, but right now, you've just stepped into the Ring of Fire.
You can't change Washington from the inside. You can only change it from the outside.
Grand jury secrecy rules.
For political gain.
The press can find out.
That has nothing to do with politics, but go ahead.
It wouldn't bother me.
Oops.
With the 2014 midterms in the rearview mirror, Republicans are already looking ahead to the 2016 presidential elections. The only problem is that their top-tier candidates like Chris Christie and John Kasich are already facing massive probes for their unsavory conduct. Joining me now to talk about all of the problems the GOP has in the run-up to 2016 is Howard Nations. Howard, the Republicans are coming off this, I guess, midterm high. Right now, they're feeling invincible. They think, everything is right in front of them. They know exactly what they want. But 2016 is still a long ways away, and they have some serious problems as they move forward. Because believe it or not, we're already in presidential campaign season. What's happening with them?
Well, the Republican governors are getting off to kind of a bad start. The ones that are planning to run for president or would like to run for president in 2016. Scott Walker from Wisconsin is avoiding a labor fight. John Kasich in Ohio is battling the state legislature on taxes. Chris Christie in New Jersey is battling the Democrats over the Port Authority. Bobby Jindal in Louisiana dropped his plans for tax reform completely. Then you got Rick Perry in Texas, who's under indictment, which is actually a badge of honor for the far right that he gets his support from. And then, of course, Governor McDonald from Virginia just got sentenced to 2 years in prison. I have no doubt he'll come back in 2 years and run as a politician with convictions. So the presidential game plan is not working out really well for them.
And it is important to focus on these governors, as that really is that's the crop. That's where they essentially grow their next GOP leaders. That's where Mitt Romney came from. That's where George W. Bush came from. His brother Jeb, former governor of Florida, he's probably headed back in there too, and he has just as many skeletons in his closet as some of these other guys. The only problem is, when you take a guy like Scott Walker, he's a guy who barely survived his recall election, barely survived his re-election this year. Let's go from the top with him. I mean, this guy is facing more problems at the moment than almost anybody.
Yeah, to follow up on your point about governors, though, before we get to Walker, it's not just the Republicans. The easiest place as a launch pad for the presidency is the governorship. George Bush actually set the example in Texas by working across the aisle with Democrats. But he's following the lead of Reagan, and then Democrats, Carter, Clinton, Bush, they make a record as governor, then they run for president where they have no Washington baggage, which is extremely important these days. And you don't have the multiple voting record that a United States senator who's made thousands of votes that they can hit. But mostly they run as an outsider to Washington dysfunction. So when you get to a guy like Scott Walker, for example, right now, he's got his day job as the governor of Wisconsin, but at the same time he's trying to run for president. Walker fought with the Wisconsin lawmakers now. Ever since their election, it's been a battle because he, of course, was recalled because of his huge battle, his attacks on unions. So the people who were just elected in November in Wisconsin, the conservative Republicans, want him now to take on right-to-work laws. They want him to really go hard after union shops and where they're forcing workers to pay union dues as a condition of employment. He doesn't want that. The right-wing conservatives who were elected in November want it. He wants no part of it because he wants no more battles. He was so bloodied by his battle, he had to go through a recall election. But he made his reputation as a union buster. He survived a recall vote. He was a complete lapdog for the Koch brothers. Is very expensive. He's run 3 races in a very short period of time. They put up huge amounts of money to keep him in office. He won from the Tea Party support as a right-wing ideologue, but now he wants to moderate his views and avoid disputes with Democrats and avoid the Washington dysfunction and focus on the economy and reach across the aisle. And the conservative Republicans absolutely won't let him do it. So, like others, he's getting big contests from his Republicans.
Well, see, you pointed out something really remarkable there is the fact that he's been through 3 recall elections in the last, or 3 elections, I should say, in the last 4.5 years. Yeah. So, he's spent a lot of the Koch brothers' money. He's used a lot of the Tea Party's resources just in regards to manpower for these 3 elections. And on top of that, this fight against the unions is what bloodied him up so badly. And now he doesn't have to worry about another election for the governor of Wisconsin. Now he is looking forward, and he says, who can I alienate and who can I not alienate? And I think he realizes that he's already got his record as a union buster. He doesn't need to take it any further. That secures his far-right cred. But when you have so many Tea Party members running your state legislature, they want to just pull you as far to the right as possible. And I think at this point, Walker says, look, I'm as far right as I can go, but still maybe have a little bit of national appeal. Do you think that's kind of where he's at right now?
That's exactly where he is right now. And the Tea Party and the Koch brothers have a legitimate position. They put him in office. I mean, he could not have won without them. He could not have won recall without them. So now he tries to move on to moderate his positions more to become a national candidate. And they're saying, no, not on our watch.
You owe us. It's time for the payback.
Exactly.
And well, let's move from Wisconsin. Let's go a little bit further east, over in Ohio. John Kasich, who for the most part he has avoided some of the massive media publicity of a guy like Scott Walker or Chris Christie, but he is facing just as many problems in Ohio. One of the few things that he actually did get some attention for was ahead of both the midterms and the 2012 election was all of his efforts to kind of purge the voting rolls. But, as far as he's concerned, that's the least of his concerns right now. He's got some other problems up there. What's happening with him?
Well, he has the same problem that they have in Wisconsin in that his Republicans won big in 2014, but they are resistant to Kasich's tax on cigarettes and natural gas drilling that's going on up there. And they have a major problem because they ran and they were elected on a $2.6 billion income tax cut promise. So now it's up to Kasich to deliver on that promise, and they're having a lot of controversy over what they can cut, where that money comes from. If you're going to cut $2.6 billion from the income tax, where's the money come from? And big battles over that, and the battles are with his far right wing. He's also got the customary battle of the far right is the battle over abortion in Ohio. The Republicans want a heartbeat bill. That is that they outlaw abortion on fetal heartbeat. But Kasich questions the legality of that. He doesn't think it'll stand up, and he doesn't want to take that position. So he faces primary attacks. If he gets into Republican primaries, he's going to be attacked big time from the far right as he tries to moderate on key issues and move to the middle.
Well, see, one of the benefits that Kasich does have is that outside of the state of Ohio, anybody who's not paying very close attention to politics, they don't know all that much about him. He could have appeal to, say, a moderate voter in the state of Florida or a moderate voter in, California that really doesn't know his background and know how extreme that he has been and that he promised to be. And with regards to this income tax issue, we're going he comes in office and says, we're going to cut this, over $2 billion from state income tax. Everybody gets a tax break on me. Hey, it's great. And then when he gets there and you finally look at the numbers and you say, oh my God, we can't do this. We don't have the money. I forgot that money doesn't just magically appear to fill these holes. And so the Tea Party says, no. Again, just like Scott Walker, you have to fulfill those promises. And he says, well, to do that, we're going to have to raise taxes on cigarettes. We're going to have to raise taxes in other places. And as soon as those words, raise taxes, come out of his mouth, the Tea Party just tunes out. It's, they can't handle that phrase. It just sets something off so crazy inside them. So,
also, like Walker, Kasich took on the union. He signed a labor law curtailing collective bargaining rights for union members. But he got huge support there from the Tea Party, but he got huge demonstrations from liberals, just as Walker did. He didn't get a recall, but what he did get was Ohio voters overturned his anti-labor law in a referendum. So he took on the unions and ultimately lost with the public, so he can't go there. Kasich denies a dispute with his own Republican legislature by claiming that, we agree on most everything, but he is absolutely unlikely to reach across the aisle to Democrats because his Republicans are going to keep pulling him right back.
Well, for Republicans, agreeing on most things is not enough. It really, they really are. It's got to be 100% or nothing. And, moving on from Kasich again, I guess we go to, no pun intended, the biggest fish out there, and that is Chris Christie. Now, Chris Christie really, if you look at the entire crop of Republicans, I think he is the best shot of grabbing the nomination and posing a serious threat to whoever his Democratic challenger is. But, this guy seems to just shake off scandal after scandal after scandal and still walk out ahead and feel like he won. And in a way he has. Give us a rundown on what's going on with Christie these days.
Well, he's in a different position than Walker and Kasich because his battle is primarily with Democrats. Starting with the George Washington Bridge scandal, he's still under investigation there, legislative investigation, and they've got people that they're going to be deposing, and some people still have to give statements that could very easily, when it comes down to the bottom line, involve him directly. But the Democratic-led legislature wants to pass a bill to reform the Port Authority, which is the source of all that scandal. And Christie threatens to veto the bill. So the legislature they're trying to pull together the votes now to override the bill. And they're going to bring the bill to the floor. He's going to give his State of the State speech on the 13th. And the same day he gives his State of the State speech, they're going to introduce that bill on the floor and just start right away slamming at his cronyism in the Port Authority. That's what it's all about. But he's under pressure to raise taxes because there's big economic problems in New Jersey. They have to pay for a transportation fund, and that's going to cause you have those magic words again, raise taxes. And that's what will cause a major conflict with his Republicans and his conservative backers. And then the whole state has economic problems. New Jersey, Atlantic City is going bankrupt. There are 5 major casinos in New Jersey that have closed in Atlantic City. Airlines have stopped flying there directly. If I want to go, I'm going to speak in Atlantic City, and I have to fly to Philadelphia and take the shuttle bus from Philadelphia to Atlantic City now because they've done away with the direct flights, nonstop flights there.
Jeez. Well, as you pointed out, he's got these fights with these Democrats over the Port Authority and over his cronyism. And, in the past, he always, the guy is like a supervillain in the regards that, you think you've taken him out, and then all of a sudden he, pops out from behind the corner to just come back at you again. It almost seems like this guy is really, has shaken everything off and is really in it for the long haul. But on the same page, he is a lot like George W. Bush in regards to the cronyism. We saw Bush's cronyism when he was governor of Texas. He's like, hey, you're a friend of mine. I got a job for you. Hey, you gave me a lot of money. I got a job for you over here. And Christie has done the exact same thing in New Jersey, and that's what's caused a lot of his problems. And if he were to make it to the White House, I would be almost terrified to see what kind of people he would put into positions of power.
Well, Christie has two other problems. Number one, in the state, he's an absentee governor. Statistic came out recently that said that 40% of his time that he has been governor, he's been out of the state. He's, as you know, head of the Republican Governors Conference. And so while the state economy has been collapsing in New Jersey, he's been out fundraising for other politicians in Iowa and all over the country. And the second problem he has that comes from the outside is that the entry of Jeb Bush, into the presidential race is going to dry up a lot of Christie money because they have the same financial sources. That is, the Wall Street guys who would back Christie would prefer to back Jeb Bush. So I think Jeb Bush was pretty clearly entering the race. His entry into the race is going to dry up a lot of Christie money. And the third thing about Christie is that bullying that goes on in New Jersey. That's fair game in New Jersey. It's okay in New Jersey, but I'm not sure how his bullying attitude when he's bullying press members who are trying to get information to pass on to voters, I'm not sure that's going to go over so well in the rest of the country.
Right. Well, one thing's for certain, obviously the next year and a half of primaries and debates, it's certainly going to be a freak show, but it's going to be very entertaining. And Howard, appreciate you telling us the story today. Always great talking with you.
My pleasure, Farron. Thanks.
The recent terrorist attacks on the Paris offices of the satirical Charlie Hebdo Weekly have reignited a firestorm around the world over the need to stamp out terrorism. But back here in the United States, we've seen an incredible amount of terrorist activities carried out by political and religious extremists, yet there is little condemnation of these events. Joining me to talk about this is blogger and author Chauncey DeVega. So Chauncey, I guess what we're seeing, what we saw over in Paris with the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and what we've seen in the United States here too many times to even think about, is the fact that terrorism has almost become a form of politics. I mean, it seems like that is a way to get your point across without having to be an elected official or anyone in a seemingly position of power. Tell us a little bit, I know you've done some really great writing on this. Tell us, this terrorism politics concept here.
I mean, terrorism is basically violence for a political end that's designed to intimidate non-combatants and society at large. Now, terrorism can be targeted against military officials, state officials, but as we classically understand it in the modern era, terrorism is political violence against non-combatants. And one of the challenges with the horrible events in Paris is to also try to look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture being that we also have terrorism here in the United States. But when there's terrorism in the United States by white right-wing Christian terrorists, it's not called terrorism. It's called a lone wolf attack. And we just had the attack on the NAACP. We just had another hearing, actually, about an attack that was planned last year, and I think it was in Atlanta, actually in the Atlanta area in Georgia, where, again, white nationalist terrorists were planning an event equal to 9/11. So as much as we are concerned about politicized Islam, we need to have a very serious conversation in this country about right-wing domestic terrorists by white Christians.
Right, and it's almost impossible right now to turn on to CNN or Fox or any of the major cable news outlets without hearing them talking about terrorism. But every time they say that word, it is in regards to Islamic fundamentalism. Now, in 2014, Cliven Bundy shows up on everybody's radar, ends up inadvertently recruiting an army. I mean, I don't know any other way to describe that. He influences and inspires this whole large group armed to the hilt with AK-47s lined up around his ranch saying, you are not going to come and take my cattle, even though I owe the government a couple $1 million. You're not going to do this. They're pointing guns at federal agents, threatening, come one step closer, we're going to blow your brains out. Now, in those discussions that we saw on traditional media, corporate media, about Cliven Bundy, especially not on Fox News, we did not hear him described as a domestic terrorists. Now, it might not have been Bundy himself. He was just he was a little crazy, didn't want to pay his grazing fees, but those that joined him, I really don't know of any other way to describe them other as terrorists, and yet we're so afraid to use that word.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Southern Poverty Law Center has done some great research. More Americans have been killed by white, right-wing Christian domestic terrorists since 9/11 than by Islamic terrorists in the United States. Again, another fact, because that's not an opinion, that's an empirical fact that you're not going to hear on the mainstream corporate media. Never mind, again, using Cliven Bundy as an example, he inspired the killers, again, terrorists, using politically motivated violence who killed the police in Las Vegas. We also have, again, examples of white right-wing terrorists attacking the Sikh temple, attacking synagogues, planning attacks all over the country under the banner of the sovereign citizen movement or under Christian Reconstructionism. So we have this perverse overlap where you have, again, politicized Islam by a small, very, very, very small group of people who use religion as a mask for their violence, but they have so much in common with right-wing Christian domestic terrorists in this country: a disregard for free speech, a dislike of secular government, a belief that government and religion and church should not be separate, an intolerance of women and homosexuals and our gay and lesbian and queer brothers and sisters. But again, you're not going to hear this in the mainstream media, because the minute you start talking about race and the minute you start engaging in critical thinking about terrorism, because terrorism is terrorism wherever it occurs, but it's much easier to bring up the Islamic brown boogeyman in 9/11 than to say, my God, we have white right-wing domestic terrorists right here in the United States that we need to, number one, publicly out, and we need to have Congress, the President, and the Senate actually sitting down, in addition to the House, of course, and actually having hearings on these matters. But as the listeners know, and as you know, whenever you try to have that conversation about the relationship between white folks, Americans, terrorism, and guns, it is silenced immediately.
Well, one of the things, as you had pointed out at the beginning of this conversation, is that we like to classify it as a lone wolf attack. If somebody goes out there and shoots up a bunch of people, as Tom Hartman had said, we call that person a mass shooter or a mass murderer. And I think a lot of it has to do with almost the fragile psyche of the American public as a whole, in that when you talk terrorism, you're talking about an abstract. We don't know how many. We don't know where they are. We don't know where they're going to hit. We don't know where they came from. And that, as a nation, it terrifies us. But when you come out and you say it was a lone wolf attack and we got him, it's done. Okay, we got him. It's over. Oh, we can go about our lives. But that really ignores what is going on. I mean, when you have a right-wing Christian bomb an abortion clinic because of their religious beliefs, and they're trying to impose that belief and taking the lives of others, I don't see a difference between that and say a suicide bomber who straps on a bomb vest because of his religion. But we differentiate between those two in America. This is, a crazy guy bombed an abortion clinic, and over there, it's terrorism.
Yeah, and it's part of a broader discourse, and we've touched on this on Ring of Fire. I've written about it on ChaunceyDeVega.com, Alternate, and Salon, is that when it's a person of color, especially an African-American who commits a crime, we have to talk about black crime, and all African-Americans have to defend themselves because of an outlier. When a Muslim, again, acts as a terrorist, an outlier again, Islam is put on trial unfairly. But when white men who are Christians go and kill people, it's a lone wolf. We never engage in a serious conversation about masculinity, about whiteness, about white masculinity, and political violence. And we also see that with mass shooting events, where we've talked about this before. We have approximately, white men in this country are approximately 28% of the population, but they account for more than 3/4 of the mass shootings. Again, if you state that fact plainly, it's verboten. It's something that can't be discussed. And our political leadership, especially on the right, especially with the Tea Party GOP, who are beholden to the radical Christians and to the gun lobby, you're never going to be allowed to talk about that in mainstream public discourse because they will shut you down.
And it's very, unsettling to think about that because, 3/4 of the mass shooting, white guys. I mean, there's no other way to say it. And we don't ever have a discussion of what's with all this white violence. Why do we have so many white men who are clearly mentally unstable getting their hands on these weapons that can kill, 60 people in 20 seconds? We don't have those discussions. Now, if it were to be an African American that picked up a handgun that holds 6 bullets and he killed 6 people, then, okay, we have a serious problem with crime every African American needs to get out there and explain to us why we don't need to come and get you all, because aren't you all like this? I mean, it's infuriating, and I don't know. I'm almost at a loss for words, because it really is such a difference between what we say about white America, and it's not fair, and I don't get it. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, as we started off, terrorism is a problem for all people of all colors, across the color line, of every religion, in every class background. Likewise, crime is a problem for all people across the color line, of every religious background, and every class background, and of both genders. But unfortunately, our public discourse is limited. Again, this is a great example of white privilege in action. You can have white folks walking around this country with machine guns, assault rifles, heavily armed, and the cops pat them on the shoulder or smile at them. Let a black person pick up a toy gun in a park or in a store, and they're shot dead. But again, it's a parallel to the conversation about terrorism, where when it's an ambiguous brown person who's Muslim, they're somehow a terrorist, and every Muslim needs to sit down and explain a minutia of their population. But a white Christian who bombs or plans to bomb the Martin Luther King Jr. site, the parade actually in Washington and Spokane, who bombed the NAACP building, who have planned other horrific events and have actually killed people all over this country. Again, the SPLC has great data, and we have dozens, if not hundreds, of murders linked to the website Stormfront, which is a white Christian nationalist website. But we don't have a serious conversation where white Christians are asked to hold their brothers and sisters accountable who are engaging in this type of hate.
Right. It is a glaring double standard that we have in the United States, and we don't look when a Christian goes out there again. I'm in Pensacola, Florida. We've had the abortion clinic bombings here, and so when a Christian goes out and does something like that, we don't sit them all down and say, there is a problem with your religion, you're too extreme, we're going to come send a drone and bomb you. Now, over in Muslim countries, we do that. We say every single member of your religion is now accountable for what a few people just did. Now, those acts are horrific. Don't get me wrong. What they did over in Paris, there is no excuse for that. There is no justification for it. But we don't have the same kind of reaction when it's a white guy who is so fundamental Christian that he can't even see straight, and he does it here. We hear on the news like there was a bombing by a guy. They don't even mention that he was white. They don't mention that he was Christian. And so what can we do? I mean, how do we even begin to address this problem?
I mean, it's a question of understanding our own country's history, both good and bad, a question about improving our educational system, which simply isn't going to happen when we have standardized testing and we have, again, the Tea Party taking over educational curricula all over this country, banning, again, any type of reasonable discussion about our country's history and the color line and power. And again, this is very, very timely, again, with what's going on with Paris, but also what's going on with the movie Selma. I just saw Selma, and I was thinking, my goodness, the KKK was the largest Christian organization, one of them in this country, rather the largest Christian terrorist organization in this country. And we forget about Jim and Jane Crow, which was supported by white Southern religious leaders. So we need to, have our own come to Jesus meeting, as they say, where we sit down and talk in our own churches, our own synagogues, and we talk across the public sphere about the connection between terrorism across the color line. Again, white terrorism is terrorism. Terrorism by Muslims is terrorism. Crime by white folks is crime. Crime by black folks is crime. And we need to push that discourse and try to deracialize it. But as we pointed out here, the fact of the matter is that race is the ether and the water that we live in and breathe and that we swim in. And unfortunately for a lot of our white brothers and sisters, white privilege blinds them to these really important facts. So our public elected officials need to step up. They need to act in the public interest and say, yes, we have a problem in the United States with white Christian domestic terrorism, just like we may have a problem with Islamic or other types of religiously motivated terrorism. The second is going to happen. The first will not.
America, it is time to wake up, have these conversations. We cannot move forward if we don't even address it. Chauncey DeVega, chaunceyDeVega.com. Great website. Everybody needs to go there, get informed. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me again.
Fewer and fewer U.S. citizens are able to retire with dignity today, and instead find themselves having to work menial jobs just to be able to stay alive. And if Wall Street gets their way, the situation for America's seniors is about to become much, much worse. And I have attorney David TeSelle with me to tell us the latest Wall Street scheme to steal your pension money. So David, in the last days of 2014, the The Democrats in the House and the Senate, along with the Republicans, decided to give a massive gift to Wall Street that unfortunately is not much of a gift to the American people. Give us some background on what just happened. That, I mean, everybody needs to be aware of what the Democratic Party really just gave to Wall Street.
Absolutely, Farron. I think this is really important. At the end of last year, they created a budget crisis, and they said that we've got to pass this new budget to keep the government open. But in order to do it, we've got to do a couple things for Wall Street that are really important. And I think people have heard about one of them. Elizabeth Warren has been really good at getting the word out about the fact that they've allowed these derivatives, these exotic investments that cratered the economy in 2008 and caused the bailout, that they've rewritten the rules back to the way it was before this all collapsed, and is going to allow this to happen again. I think a lot of people have heard about that. What they haven't heard about is this basic target that they've allowed Wall Street to put on the pension plans, and specifically union pension plans are first. And it's really important for people to understand what's going on. Pension plans are one of the last big piles of money out there that Wall Street wants to get its hands on and get fees from and be able to invest on. And what happened at the end of last year is the green light was put on, and Wall Street was put ahead of the pension beneficiaries, but the retirees, the cops, the teachers, the firefighters who did work their entire life depending upon and believing they were going to be paid a pension. Now they're going to go to the end of the line, and if we have another downturn in the economy, who's going to get cut? It's going to be those cops and those teachers and those firefighters, not the Wall Street fat cats.
We know that's a great point you just made there, is that most of these are dealing with public pensions, public servants,
Absolutely.
People who have devoted their lives to essentially helping the country to grow. We have teachers helping, students, policemen keeping us safe, firefighters protecting us. Those are the people that Wall Street is now preying upon. And this new little provision that they slipped into this must-pass budget bill says that, okay, after Wall Street gets their money, after the shareholders get their money, after everybody else in the bank, takes a little bit
Absolutely.
out of the pot, if there's anything left, you can have this money, which 100% of it is your money. If you're paying into this pension, that is all your money. But now the banks were just given this ability to just take as much as they want, really. That's basically the cut and dry of this bill.
And Farron, you pointed this out at the beginning of the segment, which is very important. This is a bipartisan problem. This is the Democrats and the Republicans working together on this. And as I said, they're manufacturing a crisis. They're not telling you what caused this problem. What caused this problem is that employers didn't put aside the money that they promised for these pensions for these employees. This is compensation. This is what these teachers and firefighters and policemen were promised when they were doing their work for the past 20, 30 years. And employers were allowed to get off the hook and not fully fund those pension funds. And so now today, what do they say? Wall Street comes in and says, we'll fix that. We'll make 8, 9, 10% returns to try to make up the difference. But what really is happening is Wall Street hedge funds are charging massive fees to get those kind of rates and then taking massive risks with those pension funds. And now by this new change in the law, they've made sure that they're going to get paid first. They're going to get their money, but they'll take massive risk with the pension benefits of those retirees that have dedicated their lives to our public service.
And what's interesting about it, though, is that, they get to charge or they'll get these massive interest rates. And like you said, they are going to get most of the return on that. However, if things go south, if we have another economic collapse and they don't get those interest rates, the U.S. taxpayers, essentially the same people they're stealing money from, are right there on the hook to bail them out again.
Farron, the Teamsters Union is a great example. They lost $9 billion in the downturn in the economy in 2008. Why did that happen? Because Wall Street was already, the Wall Street managers were already putting union funds like the Teamsters into large risky bets on the mortgage market, on CDOs, on mortgage-backed securities, on things that were synthetic, and you've heard all kinds of words. They lost all that money while taking $200 to $300 million in fees for putting them in that. And what you also need to understand, what is not talked about in the mainstream media, is that who benefited when those investments failed? Who benefited when somebody loses $8 or $9 billion on Wall Street? Guess what? Somebody else is making that money. And you know who it was? It was Wall Street. It was the big banks. It was the Goldman Sachs. It was the UBSs. It was the JP Morgan Chases. They benefited because they were the counterparty on these deals. And that's what is so foolish about saying, let's turn all the money over to Wall Street and allow them to protect the henhouse, to guard from the foxes when they're actually the foxes that we have to be worried about.
And, you know, when you're talking about the Teamsters there, I think one of the most important things about this new legislation that's going through is the fact that it first targets union pension funds. The first places where this will be put into full effect are places where you do still have very strong, very, influential and much needed public employee pensions.
That's not by accident. Make no mistake. The ultimate goal here is to privatize everything, including Social Security, and turn all that money over to Wall Street. But the place they're starting is with unions. And they're blaming unions for this so-called crisis in the pension fund because that's where they can start. And then incrementally move to get their hands on all of the public money and all of our retirement money. It's very scary. It's very scary to see what it's basically. I mean, and one way to look at it is it's a wealth transfer system taking money from the middle class and the service class in this country and putting it into the pockets of billionaire hedge fund managers on Wall Street. And when that happens, it's not good for the country.
Well, statistics are showing us, the economy is rebounding, things are doing better, but that takes into account what happens on Wall Street. Now, if you exclude Wall Street from the big economic picture, there is marginal growth in the overall U.S. economy. Most of the growth that has taken place is all centered on Wall Street, which it really is just one street in New York City where all of this economic growth has occurred, and it only benefits the people who work in those buildings. This is not benefiting mom and pop at all.
Anybody that has watched the so-called rebound in this country, it's been a rebound for 1 or 2%. And when you talk about the economy coming back, that's talking about it on a very macro level when you look at the entire pie together. But what nobody's talking about, or very few people are talking about it, you guys are talking about it all the time on this show, but is the fact that that pie now is being divided up among fewer and fewer people. And as you said, it's the people on Wall Street, not the people on Main Street.
Right. And, back to just, the actual legislation itself, as you mentioned, this was bipartisan. This was Democrats, this was Republicans, this was lobbyists too, really. I mean, they brought in everybody, and it wasn't unanimous completely. Like you said, we had Elizabeth Warren out there, banging the drum saying, people, pay attention and wake up and see what's going on, see what these people are doing. And it's not just the Republicans, it's not just the Democrats, it really is most of them. I mean, you can't even say that it's some Democrats.
The Democrats cannot be allowed to run and hide on this issue. One of the really interesting things is when you actually delve into it and you look into the committee, when it came out of committee, where they would have to take a vote to decide whether they were going to have this voted on and included in the bill. You know what? Interestingly, you can't find what that vote was because the Democrats don't want you on that committee don't want you to know that they actually supported it. And when you ask people, well, they can't remember what they voted for. That doesn't pass the test, Farron. It doesn't pass the test.
Right. This was all primarily done in secret. We don't know which specific member wrote the little writer. We don't know what party they were from. We don't know anything beyond the fact that this writer was attached, it passed, and most everybody, not all of them, but most everybody in that U.S. House of Representatives, before the Republicans had stronger majorities, passed it.
And what they did, very simply, was take the nest egg of most of these public servants or these union people that have worked very hard for it over 20, 30, 40 years in the workforce and gave it to Wall Street to charge its fees against, to bet against, to do with it what its will without any debate, without any public discussion, without any democratic process being employed whatsoever, just slipped it into the budget bill and hoped nobody would talk about it.
At this point, it would almost be better off to just pick a random person on the street, hand them this big pot of pension money, and say, "Go to the blackjack table for 2 hours."
22 black. 22
then,
black.
Yeah.
Let's see what happens.
Yep. Because that's essentially what Wall Street does. David, unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you for this discussion. A very unfortunate topic, but thank you for doing such a great job of telling us what's really happening in Washington.
No, thank you.
Few issues are as pressing in regards to the human race as a whole than the threat of catastrophic climate change. Leaders from around the world meet almost yearly to discuss ways to mitigate the effects of climate change, but back home, policies are being instituted that will only worsen the situation. So we're going to take a look at some of those decisions today as part of an environmental roundtable discussion. Joining me for today's discussion is Carol Linnit, the Managing Editor and Director of Research for DeSmog Canada, Brendan DeMelle, Executive Director and Managing Editor of DeSmogblog.com, and Justin Mikulka, Contributing Writer for DeSmogblog.com. So, Brendan, we recently, obviously, the 2014 midterm elections, Republicans get a bigger majority in the House, regain control of the Senate, sworn in early January. Within a few hours, they made it clear of what their agenda was going to be. Tell us what that agenda was.
Well, they certainly planted the flag right away that this is going to be, the worst climate-denying Congress in history. They decided that despite all the other priorities in America right now with school shootings and crumbling infrastructure and the decline of the middle class, that their first priority was going to be the passage of the Keystone XL pipeline, this Canadian tar sands export pipeline that will shuttle the dirtiest oil on the planet down through America's breadbasket to the Gulf Coast for export to the benefit of other countries and not the American people. In fact, most of the analysts think that gas prices in America will go up as a result of this, and yet this seems to be the highest priority of the Republican Party or the Republican-led Senate right now.
And what's really remarkable about this is that, again, they were only sworn in for a matter of hours before Mitch McConnell comes out and says, "Look, I know this is a bit ambitious, but I want to have a bill to the Senate floor in 3 days' time. I'm going to give you 72 hours. Let's get this out of committee. Let's get it going." And it really comes down to you dance with who brought you there. And the dirty energy industry are the ones who brought this new crop of, climate change denying, anti-environmental legislators into Washington. And so they say that Keystone XL, it's got to come forward. Let's do this. It's going to create jobs. Now that's where they're selling this. It's going to create jobs. What do we know about the real jobs numbers with Keystone XL?
Right. Despite all of the bluster from both the Congress and the industry about thousands and thousands of jobs, estimates even rising up to nearly 50,000 jobs, the reality is that the best studies and the State Department have concluded that at best this would result in 35 permanent jobs. And in a country that's hurting right now, it seems unbelievable to suggest that 35 permanent jobs would be the highest priority of the Congress heading into the new session. So what we're seeing is this misinformation campaign, and as you said, the dance card of the Republican-led Senate is full of oil industry lobbyists and executives, and not the American public, which is who they're supposed to be serving. So we're going to see this effort to push through this pipeline at the expense of American property rights, of farmers in America's breadbasket, and severe threats to water if there's a spill from this pipeline. And as I said earlier, there's the gas prices are going to be impacted by this, and more than anything else, this is a fuse to one of the biggest carbon bombs on the planet that we know we can't afford, given the climate scientists have said.
So 35 permanent United States jobs. You get more jobs than that if you go and open up a McDonald's. That's absolutely ridiculous, especially at a time when the U.S. economy as a whole, we're adding almost 50,000 jobs to the economy every single week. So even if we took the best case estimates of the industry and said, okay, the pipeline will create 50,000 jobs for the United States, well, that's 1 week. That's 1 week out of 52 of a year where we create 50,000 jobs. It really, 50,000 jobs, it doesn't mean much in the grand scheme of things. And yet we're still being sold the pipeline under the guise that this is going to save everything. This is going to reduce energy prices, which, as you pointed out, most of the studies are showing that it's actually going to increase them. This is going to help the United States get energy independence. Well, again, it's going down to the Gulf Coast so it can be sent all over the world. It's not staying in the United States. And 3, we're even finding out now that it might be a net job loser. I mean, we might lose more jobs than we create. I don't see any scenario, any study, any talking point that really sells this pipeline as being a benefit to the American public. Do you? I mean, is there anything out there? Could this pipeline bring anything to the table for the United States?
No, other than, climate disaster and economic ruin. And I think that's why President Obama immediately, issued a veto promise that if the Republicans successfully get this through both houses, that he will veto it. And that's in large part because this project isn't in our national interest. And that's really his decision, and that is his State Department will rule on that in the future here, and we'll see what happens, and we'll see whether or not, we know this Congress is captured by the oil industry, but we'll have to see how much influence the oil industry has over the White House, and that's the ultimate test for Obama's climate legacy.
It is, and it was very refreshing to see Obama come out. Shortly after they said this is our priority, Obama said, it's not my priority. I'm not going to let this legislation pass. And so it's great to see Obama come out as a strong leader. But Justin, you recently reported on desmogblog.com that in late 2014, the Obama administration, through way of this little kind of sly backdoor way, has opened up the door for possibly allowing U.S. oil to be exported, something that really has not been allowed since the 1970s. There's been very tight restrictions on it. Tell us what happened. What gift did the Obama administration give to the oil industry at the end of last year?
Yeah, so we are talking about the crude oil export ban. As you noted, it's been in place for over 40 years, and it's never really been an issue until the recent oil boom in the U.S. due to the fracking of the shale oil. And so now the oil companies have this excess oil that they're currently constrained. They can only sell it to U.S. refineries. So they've been pushing hard to lift this export ban so they can get more money for the oil on the global markets. But they've run into political resistance. This is an issue that has bipartisan resistance. No politicians want to be seen as giving the okay to send U.S. oil overseas and then having gas prices go up. So not having been able to achieve it through their normal process of lobbying and political measures, what happened is rather remarkable. At the end of 2014, the Obama administration, through a little-known department called the Bureau of Industry and Security, made some changes on the website of that bureau to their frequently asked questions page that essentially have given guidance to the oil industry that they can now export crude oil and sell it on the world market as long as they first run it through a process called stabilization. And that process essentially takes the crude oil that comes out of the ground, has natural gas liquids in it that are explosive and volatile. Stabilization process removes those, leaving a more stable form, a safer form of crude oil. And what the administration has now told the oil industry, if they take their light crude oil they're producing, stabilize it, they can now call it a refined petroleum product. Condensate is the term they're using, and they can export it. And so this has been, although at the same time giving the politicians cover by saying we haven't changed, there's been no policy change. So it's a huge win for the oil industry.
Well, you and I had talked about this recently, and this refining process to turn it from crude oil fresh out of the ground to condensate is something that's already done. They already do this, so this is not an extra step for the oil industry. They're not having to do anything extra. They're not having to make it any safer than they typically would. It just says, hey, once you do this, we've changed a few words on a website, and now you can go sell it overseas. I mean, is that basically what's happened here?
It is. This stabilization process is something the industry has done for years. It's standard before you would take crude oil out of the ground and put it in a pipeline. You would run it through one of these stabilizers to make it a safer, more stable product. It's a smart thing for the industry to do, especially before you put it on an oil tanker to export it. So it is. It's not a hardship for the industry, and it really is just a rather remarkable workaround that gives the politicians cover, allows the industry to export. And the industry analysts have really, they see this, the people at Citigroup use the phrase an opening of the floodgates for U.S. Exported oil. And they're estimating by the end of 2015, this could be up to 500,000 barrels per day will be exported. So a great start to the new year for the oil industry.
Absolutely. And we have Obama coming out saying, I'm going to veto any legislation that approves the Keystone XL pipeline, but don't look at what we just did a couple months ago because that's really going to screw things up. Carol, I want to move on to you. You recently covered a phenomenal story that says oil sands. Well, basically, let me back it up from that. Overall in the entire world, what we're trying to avoid as far as climate change is a rise in temperature more than 2 degrees Celsius. And even that 2 degrees Celsius rise worldwide is going to have some very bad effects. So a study came out recently that looked at, oil fields, coal mines, determined what we can and cannot burn. Overall, give us a quick rundown of that particular study and what we now know about our energy reserves.
Yeah, that's right. So as we're talking about all these policies that are rolling out to sort of open the floodgates for more fossil fuel exploitation, these researchers have taken a close look at what it means to have that 2-degree warming limit that we know we have to stay within to avoid catastrophic global warming. And if we are to stay on that track, what does that mean for the world's fossil fuel reserves? So they took a really close look, an integrated look at oil, coal, and gas. And of course, they found that this had huge implications for what can be exploited, what has to be left unburnt in each individual country. So for the U.S., go ahead.
No, I was going to say, go ahead and give us the specifics per country. But yeah, the U.S., obviously one of our big ones is coal. What do we know now about our coal reserves that we have?
Yeah, so as the researchers, as they analyzed it, 95% of the coal reserves in the U.S. have to be left unburnt. And similarly for the oil sands in Canada, 99% of that resource needs to remain unused, according to this analysis. And in a more sort of holistic perspective, they found that globally, 80% of coal reserves worldwide cannot be burnt. Around 50% of gas reserves and 30% of oil reserves. So what they did is, took a quick look at the location and varieties and types of fossil fuel reserves per country, and then looked at how expensive these are to exploit and produce. Of course, in Canada, the oil sands are incredibly high cost and high carbon, so that if we are, meaningfully implementing these carbon constraining policies, those are the types of resources that have to go out the door right away.
Well, it seems like in recent years, as far as I've been paying attention, the oil sands industry in Canada has really been booming. I mean, that's obviously with the Keystone XL pipeline, this oil sands, tar sands, that's what started this. TransCanada, the company that wants to put the pipeline, is obviously a Canadian company. So how lucrative is this oil sands and tar sands industry up there in Canada, and what kind of influence do they have over policy?
They have a tremendous amount of influence over policy in Canada. We've seen that through freedom of information requests that, the wording of Canadian legislation exactly mirrors proposed changes by the oil and gas industry. Their access to Canadian policymakers is it's incredible compared to commensurate access by other, public and civil society groups. So when it comes to the oil sands, we see in Canada that there's a very skewed amount of influence going into that one resource, and a tremendous amount of money is going in to subsidize this very expensive resource that is increasingly becoming out of date in a world that is rapidly moving and needs to move to alternative resources. So we see with TransCanada, the Canadian government has put millions of dollars into supporting that, as has our local oil and gas lobby bodies. So there's just millions of dollars being pumped into this, and to sort of prop up artificially this resource that really doesn't have a large role to play in a future.
Brendan, real quick, we've got about a minute and a half. I want to ask you, obviously, this influence that the industry has over our politics, over our media, this is what's helping to continue our reliance on dirty energy. In the minute and a half we have left, real quick, how do we fight back?
Well, I think there are a number of things we can do, even with the intransigence we see in Congress and the control over the media that the fossil fuel industry clearly has. I mean, we see a great number of public demonstrations and great marches, people getting into the streets, raising their voices. We see increasing resistance to these dirty energy pipelines and rail projects from First Nations groups in Canada, from all kinds of landowner groups in the U.S. concerned about property rights. And most of all, we see that people are rising up and realizing that clean air and clean water are American fundamental rights, and they should be globally, human rights. And people are ready to stand up no matter what, obstacles that the fossil fuel industry is ready to put in their way. And so I think that's the most promising development that we've seen in the past couple of years.
If you want to make change, it requires citizen action, people to get angry, people to stand up, and people really just get out there and do something. Brendan DeMelle, Carol Linnit, Justin Mikulka, thank you all for joining me, and we will definitely do this again sometime. That's it for this week's Ring of Fire, but you can keep up with us throughout the week online at ringoffireradio.com, on Twitter at Ring of Fire Radio, and on Facebook. I'm Farron Cousins, and we'll see you next week right here on Ring of Fire.